Welcome back to Perfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co host and dear friend, Jacob McQuire. And this past week, it felt like the first time in a very, very long time, the Panthers had a just solid draft top to bottom. Did not feel like we reached at any point. Dan Morgan was in full control, and we saw that through all 7 rounds. The only round we did not pick in was the 6th round, but we did end up having a seventh, taking Dan Morgan's former position linebacker to close a very productive weekend. Jacob, what are your thoughts on the Carolina Panthers and their draft class as we dive into the draft recap this week?
Well, I wouldn't say for the first time in a long time that we've had a good draft. I'll point to last year where we got the offensive rookie of the year, some productive defensive rotation players. I would say Scorton's a starter now, but this one might be on a new level. And I think it's because of the trench work that Dan Morgan and his staff were able to pull off with getting tackle Monroe Freeling in the first round, another tackle of the defensive variety in the second round, and then stealing a center in the fifth round that probably can start at some point this year. This was fandom aside, I think this was probably my favorite draft because similar to last year, I think all 7 players that Carolina selected can have a defined role, even down to the 7th round linebacker. He can be a core 4 teamer because he's one of the most athletic non combine invites ever in the history of mock draftables, like a website that tracks player measurements that enter the draft. So I'm very happy about this draft, starting with Monroe Freeling, who was probably both of our favorite. I know at least he was my favorite player for the Panthers in the first round. I didn't think he would be there, and he ends up being the pick at 19. So I'm pretty ecstatic across the board with this draft.
Yeah, we saw each other briefly before the draft kicked off last Thursday, and it was exciting because like we were talking about like kind of who we wanted, and we both were in agreement that Monroe Freeling, if he was there, you got to get that guy. I felt like if the Panthers front office had a lot of confidence in their offensive lineman development, Max Ianitor, who went a few picks later, would have been a great like Taylor Moton replacement. But I'm guessing just based on Ike Ekwonu and the timeline on his injury, signing Rasheed Walker to a very minimalistic like 1 year contract, you're looking at like a potential left tackle of the future, which I think is huge for this team. You add in depth at that rotational defensive line, like maybe the guy who's playing instead of Bobby Brown this year, and you have Derek Brown and Turk Wharton next to him. I think that could be a formidable trench trio where you're just able to clog up run lanes and make play after play. So overall, it was great. It just felt like everything was in succinct. You weren't reaching for players like last year. I know you brought up last year's draft. We did trade up for Nick Scorton. We did kind of move around to kind of grab who we wanted to, and it felt like it was very needs based at times. And while we addressed a lot of holes on our roster in this draft class, it felt like we just let the draft come to us. And there was a term that the Athletic used in regards to the Panthers draft where they discussed it's like big dudes we're taking. Like these are a massive human beings that we are putting on this roster. And I don't know if it's the compensate for the lack of size you have at the quarterback position, but like all the starting wide receivers now, Jimmy Horn's kind of the only rotational piece that's under 6 foot. All these guys are like 6'2" or higher, and that's just impressive. Like, and to see these towering figures that have all different skill sets, and then offensive lineman Monroe Freeling, he's a 6'7" dude. Lee Hunter, he's a guy that's over 300 pounds, joining a whole bunch of other hog mollies in the trenches. So just really, really cool to see Jalen Phillips, who we signed this offseason, 6'5" kind of guy. Like it's really cool to see that we are building a very formidable defense and offense in terms of just guys that can impose their will.
Dave Gettleman would have loved this draft, right? Large people hog mollies, like you referred to. Just to be clear, the actual players Carolina added in the first round: left tackle Monroe Freeling, maybe right tackle, Lee Hunter, defensive tackle in the second, Chris Brazel, the second wide receiver from Tennessee in the third round, Will Lee, a corner from Texas A&M in the fourth round, Sam Hecht, center from Kansas in the fifth round, Zachy Wheatley, a safety from Penn State in the fifth round as well. We had 2 fifth-round picks. And in the seventh round, Jackson Kuwach, who is also from Miami, like Dan Morgan, but it's Miami of Ohio, not Miami, Florida. So if you take a look at that draft group excluding Kuwach, who was a late seventh rounder, all power four production, right? Freeling, Brazel, and Will Lee are all SEC. Sam Hecht and Lee Hunter were Big 12, and Wheatley, the safety, came from Penn State, who was Big 10. So that's another trend going back to last year, even the first year that Dan Morgan was in charge. A lot of power four draft picks added to this team, and they are all of the plus variety when it comes to size and measurable. So I'm excited about it. We've talked a lot about Freeling, who I think should track to start at left tackle pretty early this season. You don't sign somebody to a swing tackle money and then draft a left tackle within the top 20 to not have that guy start. So I would expect that. I think Lee Hunter, the defensive tackle, can start as well. One thing that people don't seem to talk about a ton is that he had 31 and a half tackles for loss in his 3 years as a starter. So immediate production in the run game. And we'll talk a little bit more. It's going to involve one of my takes about Chris Brazel, the Tennessee wide receiver. I think we're going to see him a lot this year as well. He's not the same as Tedero McMillan, but still 6'5", very fast. It can get down the field. Not exactly the underneath yak guy that Carolina needed, but this guy can get open and take it to the house when given the opportunity. So I'm pretty excited about this class. Other than Freeling, who is your favorite pick out of this group?
Ooh, favorite pick. I'm going to kind of lean into a conversation we had off air before jumping on. And it's the fact that you look at, and I'm kind of cheating because it's two picks, but Will Lee and Zakee Wheatley. When you look at those players, you just brought up the height of Chris Brazel, who we took in the third round, 6'5", speedster on the outside from a measurable standpoint. And I do not want to use this comp because this is not something that our listeners or even the fan base needs to think about, but like Randy Moss-esque in terms of just being that fast at that size. It's an impressive combination. Very few people have this. So the fact that he catches away from his body, he can make explosive plays. But to go back to like my favorite pick, it's like Will Lee and Zakee Wheatley. It's because those are 6'2", 6'3" guys. And we're seeing this evolution of like teams trying to be versatile and that they can do 11 personnel things and like 12 or 13 personnel, and they can do 12 and 13 personnel things out of 11 personnel, and you have fluidity to kind of do as you will in your playbook out of these different formations and force the defense's hand. So when you get into bigger personnel packages, usually a team sends out, like on the defensive side, a linebacker for a secondary piece. And it's when you see how big these guys are, how they can come in like heat seeking missiles in the case of Wheatley. Like these are big physical players that you don't feel like you have to go from nickel to base package to play these offenses in today's league. So I think just the kind of foresight, knowing like, hey, Mike Jackson, he's about to be 30 years old. He's at the end of his contract. We need to be thinking about the future of that. To draft potential developmental guys that could play a key role this year, I think is huge, especially when you look at like how it compares to the growing NFL, or not growing NFL, but the evolution of how personnel packages are used in the NFL.
I think the Rams are the perfect example because even when they don't have a second and third tight end out there, for the last decade, one of their receivers has been a tight end, right? They have Jordan Whittingham, who's huge and can block. Puka Nakua lines up alongside or shades outside the tackle and can block. Cooper Kupp was maybe the best at it over the last decade. He
Ben
was a tight
Skoranek was
Ben
like playing
Skowronek,
fullback in like a 12 personnel
and
kind of
these are
packages. Yeah.
wide receivers, so they could take, or the Rams could take advantage of you having your base defense out there because one of the receivers will go out there and block, and so you're down a man in the run game. I think getting these larger defensive backs helps with that a ton, especially Wheatley, who's produced a ton of turnovers in his years at Penn State. I'm going to go on the opposite side of the ball. Outside of Freeling, my favorite pick is going to be Sam Hecht, the center from Kansas State. Throughout the draft process, one of the things I mentioned on this podcast is that people may not want a tackle in the first round or in the first few rounds because it's not as exciting, or people want a safety or a tight end or whatever it might be. But even without Ike Ekwonu, this was the most expensive offensive line in the league this year. They needed to get younger, cheaper, and better. And they did that with Freeling, but Sam Hecht, somebody that I think can push for the starting position, was a fifth rounder. His salary is going to be pennies compared to that of Taylor Moton, who had a presser today who said, yeah, I'm good to go. I'm playing this year. And Rob Hunt, who's about to be 30, he's going to be making close to $30 million a year. getting cheaper offensive linemen that are starting caliber players, I think is something huge for this team in particular. And I think that stylistically, Hecht can be a pretty similar step in for someone like Cade Mays, who left and got $8 million in free agency, where Hecht's going to be making, I think, less than half that on a fifth year or fifth round pick salary per year. So I really love the value they got there with Sam Hecht, someone who I think a lot of people thought could go on day two. They end up getting in the fifth round.
Huge value. I don't know if there were. I would hate to say off-field concerns because from everything that I've heard about this guy, he's a good stand-up kid. Brandon Coleman, excellent kind of offense defensive line evaluator, who's his favorite center in this class. And you talk about like last year, I think the foresight this front office had in signing Rico Dowdle to like a 1 year contract. It's kind of I think what you have with Luke Fortner, where it was just a very cheap deal. We did it with Rasheed Walker on the offensive line as well, just to give us some depth. But you're looking towards the future and going, hey, like maybe you're not the starter for us this year as a fifth round pick. Like we need you to develop. There are things that we think you need to improve on before you becoming a starting player in the NFL. And if that's the case and he takes that step, then it's exactly like you said. You get cheaper at the offensive line at two spots in this year's draft class. And maybe next year that's when you're looking at adding another right tackle to kind of develop behind Moton while he's on the last like year or two of his NFL career. You draft a guard or two to replace either Robert Hunt or Damian Lewis. I think Damian Lewis is a little bit younger, so it's more just worried about the future post Hunt. But those are the kind of things that this front office is doing really well because it's you always want to be a year or two ahead. You don't want to be a year or two behind. That's how Howie Roseman and the Eagles keep building championship caliber teams is they're always thinking about that next step. So I think with that does I think justice to the Carolina Panthers draft. I'm sure you may have a take regarding it. But I just love the fact, and I said it earlier, but it did not feel like the Panthers reached it all. They let the draft come to them, and San Francisco Data Niners. He's a great account on Twitter in terms of just doing visualizations and different kind of data points that kind of give you like kind of a framework. And he had the Carolina Panthers with the best value in terms of biggest reaches through the first 6 rounds. We were at negative 33% in terms of steals. And that like obviously the negative 33% sounds bad, but it means you're not reaching. You're just
Yeah.
letting value come to you. Where on the opposite end of the spectrum, you had teams like the Jacksonville Jaguars that were like plus 42%, teams like the 49ers at plus 32%, like some of these big reaches. And this doesn't mean that you just got this great player. Like Sam Hecht, the reason why he fell is there's probably concerns about his game somewhere. And so if he's not able to work on those, he's probably not going to turn into the talent that some evaluators thought he could be at the next level. So don't ever look at steals as being a steal. Typically, where a player is selected, that's kind of where their value is at. Where reaches, those tend to be reaches because you are going against consensus where you have a lot of aggregate evaluators going, I'm not high on this guy. And so that's something we're going to talk about in a second, like biggest winners, biggest losers of the draft. But I think before getting into that, it's good to kind of dissect the first round that we did a mock draft of last week and go, hey, what were the biggest surprises? What caught us off guard? Because you're never right. There's no mock draft that is right out there, but it is always cool to see how things unfold and the domino effects from a certain player being drafted at a spot and allowing other players to fall. So, any closing remarks on the Panthers draft class before moving on?
Yeah, just that there were no reaches, and that's the important thing. Even if steals don't turn out to be steals, I think it's better to have steals be the value where they're taken rather than reach for someone who isn't worth the value. And that's why the Panthers landed at that spot. It wasn't just letting the board come to them and getting the steals. They didn't reach on anybody in this class.
And that makes you feel good. There's a lot of different front offices where it felt like they reach for certain positions, whether it was need or they're claiming fit, John Lynch. But it's things like that I think makes you question kind of some of the draft philosophy of other front offices. But biggest surprise through the first 12 picks, Jacob, there were some interesting kind of risers and fallers. Ruben Bain falls outside of the top 12. I guess you could say that's a surprise, but his arm length was a question coming into this process. Arvell Reese falling the 5 was a little bit of a shocker, but again, being a top 5 pick, it feels like at worst case, it was like Leonard Williams with the Jets many, many years ago, where arguably one of the better talents in the draft, but because teams were just passing on him for either different players or different positions, he was able to fall to I think it was the 6th pick in that year's draft. But for you, who caught you off guard the most night one?
It's probably one of the two best players in the draft, Jeremiah Love. We during our mock draft, I had him going 7th to Washington. That was maybe a little too low. Maybe the range would have been the Giants at 5 or the Titans at 4. But he doesn't even get to that point because after Mendoza and Bailey go, both of whom we had correct during our mock draft, Jeremiah Love, the running back from Notre Dame, goes 3rd overall to a team that extended James Conner, their starting running back recently, signed Tyler Algier to be in their running back rotation. He came out today or maybe yesterday and said Algier did and said he thought he was going to be the lead back prior to that draft pick. They already had Trey Benson, who's probably going to find his way off the roster. So they were set at the running back spot. That's the point I'm trying to make. And none of those guys are as talented as Jeremiah Love is. But for a team that had a ton of other concerns, maybe offensive line, maybe they could have traded down from 3 if some teams were willing to trade up. They stuck and picked a running back at pick 3 who, while incredibly explosive, is going to be fun to watch. I'm not sure he makes that team any better than they were uh, 10 minutes before they made the pick.
It really gives more questions than answers because yes, this is a roster I think is devoid of talent, but it's you have some questions at the edge position on defense, and maybe if Arvell Reese, their thought from the scouting department is at best he's an off-ball linebacker, then I guess that kind of ruins like why you would take a player of his caliber in the top 5. But again, positional value was thrown out the window when you take Jeremiah
Or
Love.
yeah,
So
or one of the 2 right tackles that went in the top 10 could have been the pick
yeah,
there.
and I don't know if they, because there were concerns, I guess, about Francis Mauigo's back that came up, but like maybe they didn't feel like Fanu was big enough to play the right tackle position. Whatever it was, their evaluations landed him on a arguably I think one of the worst selections in the top 5. And I'm not a David Bailey fan, but when you're looking at just the value that's provided from the edge position, you don't have to be anywhere near a top edge defender to give your team surplus value from that pick. Where with Jeremiah Love, it's like there is very little surplus value that's going to be had on the rookie contract. And then once he's extended, very little, if not any. And we've seen with guys taken in the top 10, their teams don't perform well from like a regular season standpoint. Like as much as Christian McCaffrey was loved here in Charlotte, North Carolina, like the Panthers didn't win anything or do anything while he was on the team. And the same was with, and same has been true for like the Atlanta Falcons with Bijan Robinson. So you
Leonard
see
Fournette as well.
with the Jaguars. Yeah, like yes, he went and won a Super Bowl in Tampa Bay with the Buccaneers, but they never really did anything with the team that drafted him. So you just like look at the historical context behind taking a guy like that as a bad franchise. This does not set yourself up for success in the future, even if you were down on a lot of the other players. Like this just felt like bad value overall.
Saquon Barkley at 2,
Yep.
leaves and wins the Super Bowl in Philly. Ashton Genty didn't work out super well last year, but there are extenuating circumstances. The rest of that offense really stunk. But that just goes to the point. Are you are are the Cardinals ready to take a running back at 3? The answer to me would have been no.
No.
But we'll see. I guess this year, maybe between Jacoby Brissett, Carson Beck, whom they drafted, I think at pick 65, Gardner Minshew. Maybe they can work something out, but I think finishing off the O line, maybe getting another edge rusher, maybe getting Carnell Tate, adding another receiver to a group that has Marvin Harrison Jr. and Michael Wilson to really give yourself a
And you
trio
have
of
Trey
good
McBride
pass
at
catchers.
tight
Yeah,
end. Like that
McBride as
you have
well.
guys that are able to make plays after catching the ball.
Yeah, I think all those could have been positive directions for this team, but there's no denying Jeremiah Love's talent. I just don't know how talented or how his talent will help this team win more games than maybe a starting offensive lineman would. But I think that's also to the benefit of the Titans because I prefer them taking a receiver to Jeremiah Love to help out Cam Ward, and that's what ended up happening, right? Because Love went a pick before, and then the domino effect is that Arvell Reese falls to the Giants at 5. If he fit there, but you can't really deny the upside and the talent. So, out of the entire top, was this 1 through 12? I think Jeremiah Love is definitely the most surprising, and then his selection caused the ripples of the picks that followed him.
It did, and I would say going to your point about like you brought up other illustrations or examples of running backs that were taken high, and it was like the team, their situation never was really built for a guy like that. And I think the last time you could say a running back was taken in the top five where he had the infrastructure with the Dallas Cowboys because they
Right.
built a phenomenal offensive line. It was just Tony Romo got injured and they lucked into Dak Prescott in the fourth round, so everything kind of just fell into place and you were able to maximize the rookie surplus value there. But like outside of that, like this doesn't work out. And so I think while he might be fun from a fantasy standpoint, the Cardinals may be a fun offense to watch for the next couple of years. I don't see this pick as helping them take that next step as a team. So I think, and it's kind of been rumored around the NFL, this was a move to kind of sell tickets and get fans in the stands. So that's what your goal is as an owner, and you have no intention of winning, then congrats, good job, you accomplished that. But
But
moving,
their fan favorite player was James Conner, so it's going to be taking snaps away from him.
but and I'm not
I guess it's
justifying this,
to
but
sell jerseys maybe because it's
is
a new player, right?
James Conner,
Jeremiah
they
Love.
did extend him, and I would have to see how much guaranteed money is locked up in. But he's coming off an injury, and he's 30 years old. So I
Right.
think the Cardinals, at least in their mind, are going, "Hey, we have Jeremiah Love with the fifth year option for the next 5 years, and if we want to franchise tag him, we have like in essence 6 years where he has no say. He's playing as an Arizona Cardinal." I think you look at that, and then you look at the addition of Tyler Algier, and those two, I think, are the future when you look at the next 3 or 4 years. I think James Conner is very much like a 1 2 year window when you're planning for the future.
Fair enough.
So, but yes, we're kind of getting off topic with roster construction, how the Cardinals will go about sharing carries over this next year or so. Biggest surprise through 13 through 24. A lot of people, and I think like this was the one that was like almost like comp the most outside of like Vega Ione to like the Baltimore Ravens. Was Dylan Thieneman to the Minnesota Vikings to be the Harrison Smith replacement. They end up taking Caleb Banks, a 6'5", 330-pound, just behemoth of a human being. Obviously, had some questions about a foot injury right around the combine end of last year. Clearly, medicals come back good to the point where the Vikings feel comfortable taking him. Is that the biggest surprise, or was there something that maybe the Los Angeles Rams did that I think really had everybody taken aback?
You were surprised by the Rams pick? No, that clearly. Like, we'll start with Caleb Banks because the Rams thing is kind of a cop out because I think is the surprise of the draft. Caleb Banks, his medicals must have come back clean, uh, having injured the same foot 3 separate times in a calendar year or over a year and a half. Very explosive player. He does have some holes to his game, like he needs to work on finishing plays, but just the most disruptive pass rusher from the interior. And that's something you noted, and I want to give you props in particular that Minnesota really needed because they got rid of two starting defensive tackles. That was a position they really needed to address. So position maybe not the surprise, but Banks going there was the surprise there. To the Rams, back to the Rams. This is a team that I think you and I talked about as a receiver team. I had thought that maybe they could go O line as well. Ty Simpson, I thought would go in the first round as like a trade up to 32 or something with Arizona or
Maybe
31.
25. Yeah, I think
Maybe
nobody
maybe
thought that he would
25.
be
Who was 25? Was that
for the Bears, but it
the
was
Bears?
like the
Yeah.
Browns and Eagles were all right around there. So you don't know if one of those teams would have traded back to be at the top of the second. But yes, to your point, everybody thought like in the 20s, that's where Ty
Yes.
Simpson's going to go.
But I thought if Jackson Dart goes at around 25, I think he went 26. That's where Ty Simpson needs to go. He went 13th to the Los Angeles Rams, no trade involved whatsoever, in a year coming off of a year in which their quarterback, Matthew Stafford, won the MVP award. And this team is the betting favorite. You can go look right now, pause the episode and go look. They're the betting favorite to win the Super Bowl right now. And they drafted what I would assume to be the quarterback of the future. But they also said that they're working on a contract extension with Matthew Stafford. The pick is just crazy to me. I know the connections between Les Snead and Ty Simpson's father, Jason Simpson, who's a coach he's the head coach of UT Martin. They've been tight for years, apparently. So there was familiarity there. Ty Simpson's clearly QB2 in this class, but 13 was a little bit rich for me. I will say, however, this is probably the best place Simpson could have gone to get prolonged development. And I think McVay's the best at extracting value out of quarterbacks in the entire NFL. So we'll have to see.
Entire NFL is kind of crazy.
Maybe Shanahan. I guess
I was about to
Shanahan.
say he
Yeah.
he he works some magic with Brock Purdy, which is what the Ty Simpson comp. But I think the biggest, actually, I'll say there are two knocks I'm going to kind of point out with Ty Simpson. Is one, he's not like the most physically imposing. Like Fernando Mendoza looks like a guy that's supposed to go first overall. He's like 6'5", like 230. Like he's hitting certain benchmarks that like you feel comfortable that this guy can go into like Baltimore or Pittsburgh and sustain hits in November, December weather. And that's really what you're looking for in terms of like the physical style. You see Drew Aller get drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers in the third round. Like clearly, like there's talent there, but there's other question marks around this game. So Ty Simpson, obviously a very polished guy, had time to sit and learn. His dad kind of grew up around football, so he's been immersed in it his entire life. So and you see that when he's reading the field, he's making kind of his progressions. But the issue is he only has 15 starts. So when you look at guys with limited starts that were drafted high, you're going to guys like Trey Lance, Mitchell Trubisky. Now, granted, those are top 5 picks, not like a top 15 pick. But this to me just screams like this is an inexperienced guy that does not have the physical tools to sustain like probably late into seasons. And obviously the LA Rams play in a dome, so that helps him out in terms of half his games being played. But this is a situation where I feel like you're reaching very much for a player that was probably going to go 10 picks later. And it feels, I don't want to say like nepotism played a hand, but like Les Snead being really close with the dude's dad and just seeing Sean McVay's body language, I think there's an element of like, why didn't you take a offensive lineman or a wide receiver? Because those guys will help you prepare for the future just as much. Like you're going to have guys that are coming off contracts or getting old like a Devontae Adams. Like you got to think about like future plans for those guys. And if Ty Simpson isn't just this talent that's just jumping off the page, like if Sean McVay is truly this guy that can develop quarterbacks, then like why are you taking a gamble with a guy that has, I think, a very limited ceiling? Now, if he is Brock Purdy, then maybe it was worth it. But I just think that like you're trying to thread a needle through a hole right here, and it's not to your team's best interest long term as you're making it out to be.
It felt like the Rams could have taken, let's see, Makai Lemon was still there, right? Felt like
Yeah.
they could have taken him and then swung back to pick 25, like we're talking about, if they wanted Ty Simpson that badly. That way you get a receiver that can help you this year with Adams getting older. And with Puka, like Puka's going to get paid soon, so they need cheap receivers as well, cheap productive receivers as well. Um, and then maybe come back and gotten Ty Simpson. But maybe they didn't want to give up a pick next year, which is supposed to be better. I don't know. Overall, it's just incredibly surprising. I like audibly said "wow" when it happened. Like that hasn't happened to me since like Daniel Jones or Michael Penix when he was drafted 8th overall.
Yeah. The Penix, like, and to me, like this particular pick gives off JJ McCarthy, a guy where there is talent on the screen, but there's just limited snaps and limited reps. And you just
Mhm.
wonder, like, hey, like some of his issues in terms of progressing as a player, I don't think come with like understanding film and breaking down things. It's when things get muddied, how do you handle stress and kind of the pressure? And I think he struggles with that. In order to get over that, you need more reps. He didn't stay in college. He's going to be behind Matthew Stafford, barring some nightmare injury scenario where you don't want this guy starting in year one. So it's just the things that are going to help him, he's not going to be able to experience right away. And you just wonder if that's going to come back and bite the Rams later on. So moving on, we still have a lot to touch on this episode. Biggest surprise picks 25 through 32. Kedrick Folk fell to pick 31. The Titans felt obligated to move up and grab him. And I'll throw this out to you because I think this is an interesting kind of thought process here to think about. They go up, they get their edge rusher and Keldrick Folk. and he's a great run defender. I think he fits that defense from like a philosophy and just how he's going to play defensive end and just stop the run. Is that better, the collection of Carnell Tate and Kendrick Falk, compared to maybe an Arvell Reset 3 and getting like a Denzel Boston at 31? I want to throw that out to you because this is kind of what I'm thinking about. It's like when you evaluate like teams in this draft, you have to look at the opportunity costs, and this must have been something they rolled through their thought process as well. What would you have done if you were the general manager of the Titans?
So I'm looking at my board. I would do the option that they actually did. So Tate and Falk on my board, it's like comparable, that like maybe 10 points apart, in the Falk and Tate favor. But I'm a bit higher on Carnell Tate comparatively to Arvell Reese when you're looking at their positions. Falk was my fourth edge rusher, I think, and for a Robert Sala scheme in particular, I think he can track to be. I wouldn't say this now, but once he grows his pass rush game, guy like John Franklin Myers, really, really good even front or odd front defensive end, even front outside guy. I think that's a realistic path for Falk. And that's something that Robert Sala defensive lines have always valued. I just think Tate is like a tier or two above Denzel Boston as a player as well. And I think he's going to be a much friendlier target to Cam Ward, who they're trying to evaluate right in year two. Um, so
Yeah.
I think
No,
that's the I think this is the right move, and it didn't shock me when Tennessee moved up to get Falk. It did shock me that he fell a little bit, especially behind a guy like Akeem Mesidor, who went 22nd, I believe. I told you it would be around this point. We went, I think we had him go pick 30 in our mock draft, but I knew some team would be a sucker and take him within the like the 15 to 25 range, and it ended up being the Chargers, who
I,
I
yeah.
is he first of all, he's older than Tui Tuipulotu. I don't think his ceiling is higher than Tuli's either. So,
That's what I was
yeah,
like where they developed Thule, it's like why wouldn't you take another guy like Kendrick Folk who's going to help you immediately in the run game? I
exactly.
Caden McDonald is a guy that I think we had comped right around that area. I think that was the guy that we had going to the Chargers, and like that made sense. Like a defensive line guy where it's like you felt like there was room to grow.
Malachi Lawrence went one pick after as well.
Yeah, and it
Messidor.
I like there were so many of those guys where I like if the Chargers had taken him, that would have made sense. Like a lot of people were comping Akeem Mesidor to the Bucks because they were like in a win now mode, and it's just I
Right.
did not get that sense from the Chargers. They have a front office that hails from like Baltimore and George Hortez. I did not understand the timeline on this pick when it's a cap dude who. I like to me like if you're drafting this guy, like I would have expected like a team like the Buffalo Bills, or I'm trying to think of other teams with like that felt that pressure of like,
Even the Cowboys, I think, could have used Messidor because with the reworking of their interior defensive line, I think he could have been a plug and play guy right there. But with the Chargers, it's just extra unique to where not my favorite pick. And going back to last year when Joe Hortez got there, I'm starting to be a little bit down on him. Two underwhelming free agencies last year. A running back in the first round, who it's not Omarion Hampton's fault that he got injured, but because that team, the Chargers team, does tend to get injured, you would have liked to have seen more O line reinforcements or something like that. Um, Not my favorite picks whatsoever. And Falk isn't our biggest surprise here. It is Keelan Rutledge, the guard from Georgia Tech, sneaking into the first round. I think Houston traded up to get him, if I'm not mistaken, a couple spots. And yeah, they traded with the Bills, I think. And not my favorite pick whatsoever. I didn't have film on Rutledge, so I wasn't able to fully evaluate him. But from like YouTube cut ups and Georgia Tech, we'll call it game cut ups, like the sideline view, I thought he would have been somebody that goes around pick 60, maybe pick 50, because it's a bad draft class. And even though he could be a plug and play guard for that team, I'm never a fan of breaking like 20 to 30 pick tiers to go get a guy, especially trade up for someone in the first round. I know they only gave up like a fourth or something, but not my favorite pick here for the Houston Texans. Peter Woods, I think, would have been a better pick, but they did circle back and get Caden McDonald, the nose tackle from Ohio State, quickly in the second round. So they were able to address the interior defensive line. Just not my favorite here. And I think it was a surprise to a lot of people that a guard other than Venga Ioane went in the first round.
Yeah, because he was not the like everybody was talking about like Chase Besantis, maybe Emmanuel or
Emmanuel
I'm gonna say
Pregnon from
Pregnon. I was about to
Oregon.
say
He went round
yeah,
5, so he felt
yeah,
quite a
which
bit.
was
But
he was an older
he's older.
prospect.
Yeah, he's older.
And that's that like that was like my thought process with my take last week with Akeem Mesidor. It's just like I felt like that was gonna have him dropped a lot further on like NFL team boards was that Pregnon reasoning. But yeah, to see Rutledge go that high was a bit of a shocker. Like obviously they want to address the trenches on both sides of the ball, kind of dictate that. I mean, adding Caden McDonald into a defensive line with Will Anderson and Daniil Hunter, like that's crazy. Like that is like even if Caden McDonald's calling card is not rushing the passer, this is a guy that's going to take up two blockers. He's going to plug running lanes, and like that's huge. That is absolutely fantastic for them because you want to get into situations where you can force teams in the third and longs, so you unleash Will Anderson and Daniel Hunter. So I thought that was incredible at the top of the second for Houston, but yeah, I felt like you could have gotten a little bit more value, maybe taken McDonald at this pick and then Rutledge at the top of the second. But again, I don't know how teams were evaluating Rutledge. This was a guy that in film circles, a lot of people raved about. I just didn't see it from a consensus standpoint. Maybe that was lack of tape. Maybe the media just didn't have the access, kind of like what you were dealing with, Jacob, when looking at like this player. Is he a guy that can play at the next level? And if they had that tape, they had their answers off that tape. Like this is a guy that he was on the phone with D'Amico Ryans, like when he was getting drafted, and he was like, "Hey, like at a place like an Airbnb, they had chicken wings, just him and his family. He got called. He's like, "Hey, I'm ready to put guys in the dirt." Like that. That's his mentality. You love that, like with offensive linemen just being psychopaths with wanting to bully and push people around. And that's what you have with this guy. So hopefully it pans out. I don't think it's necessarily the reach that we saw with Cole Strange several years
Yeah.
ago, but it's one of those where it's just because of kind of consensus you wonder if, hey, did they reach a little bit and could have gotten better value? But that's where a lot of analysts, a lot of people will talk about like post draft, like, hey, this guy felt like a steal and this guy felt like a reach, and if you had just taken him at the opposite rounds you would have felt better about the draft as a whole. I think that's what you have to do with Houston's draft process, looking at it from like the outside in.
I also don't think this team is good enough to be fit picks away in the late first round. Even the defense is fine. I still have questions about Stroud and maybe or a third receiver, but we will see then. You know who we did have tape on throughout the process? Most of the Panthers guys. And we can get into the winners and losers now of the draft. I know that we are Panthers fans, but for a second consecutive year, to me, it feels like the Panthers hit on the majority of their picks. It's early, of course, but getting, I'll say, the best left tackle prospect in this class in Freeling. I know Fano and Malinois were right tackles. Lee Hunter, who on my board is 29th, he was ahead of Caden McDonald for me. I think he does have some juice as a pass rusher. And I think playing beside Derek Brown is going to help him with that. Like we talked about earlier, gets in the backfield to fight or to get runs on the ground, 31 and a half tackles for loss. So that bodes well for him as a pass rusher. Chris Brazel, size speed receiver. We talked about it with we thought that the Panthers might take Dejon Stribling, who the 49ers picked at pick 33. And I think in my mock draft, at least, I said he's a strong, big, fast receiver. That's what Dave Canales likes. And I think they get the better player with better value in Brazel. And then we talked about the day 3 guys, all of them having a role. I think Carolina is the big winner. Maybe I'm biased, but among all of the winning classes, I like Carolina's the most.
From a consensus draft grade rankings, I think Renee does a good one on Twitter. And it's cool because I think the Panthers were ninth overall out of all 32 teams when you looked at various grades across different networks. The one that kind of surprised me was Brian Burke with ESPN kind of built a model for them to evaluate or give grades. And it was based off 4 categories. You had capital management, fulfilling needs, reaches, and positional value. And obviously, like we talked about with this draft class, reaches and taking good premium positions early and often, we had A's in both those categories, but we had C's in capital management, fulfilling needs for an overall grade of 76, which was honestly like how this this ESPN like draft grading process works, it was the worst in our own division. But I think looking at it from the outside in, this was definitely a really, really good draft. And I think when you look at like categories like needs, they're using like your top four needs as a team. And I think like offensive tackle, like obviously it wasn't screaming off the board like some of the other positions. When you look at premium positions and planning for the future, I definitely think it felt that. And unlike where this model is taking in the consideration. So that was the only probably negative I saw about our draft class. So I agree with you there. The other two I think we wanted to mark down as winners were the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who got Ruben Bain, who fell. I loved how he approached the podium. A lot of people were putting on the cap with that selfie booth and stunting on the camera and all that. He just simply grabbed his hat, walked to the booth, and he is all business. And that's what he has been throughout this draft process. I think that's what helped led Miami to a national title, even though they were a Fernando Mendoza run away from potentially winning that title. He was a big catalyst for that. And then I think the Browns had an excellent draft this past year. I don't feel like they necessarily reached a ton, and they got a lot of value similar to the Carolina Panthers.
I think the Browns got. I'm looking at their draft here. Probably six starters. One, two, three, four, five. Maybe
I mean, when
five
you look at
starters.
like adding Spencer Fanu and Casey
Yeah,
Concepcion to that offense, like those are day one guys that you can just plug and play. And I think that's huge for Todd Monken, who's going to probably use Casey Concepcion very much like Zay Flowers. And believe it or not, they both have drop problems. So there you go.
yeah. I was thinking Boston, Emmanuel McNeil Warren as well. I think both of those guys can start. And Austin Barber, the tackle from Florida that they got, both Fano and Barber, the two tackles they took in the top 100 picks, both have left-right versatility. So whoever wins the competition, the other one can go to the other side, which I really like. And then you talked about Tampa, not only getting Ruben Bain, but Ted Hurst, one of our favorite guys they got in the third round. I think one pick after the Panthers took Brazel, and then Josiah Trotter, who's a linebacker I'm a fan of. They got in round two as well. Yeah,
They got from the ESPN like draft score, they did get the highest one in our division at 87 overall. So they were hitting needs, as Ruben Bain was a huge need fulfiller, and then Ted Hurst as Mike Evans is going out the door. I think that helps their wide receiving core.
I, I feel like, and not to get on a rant here, but I feel like a lot of national media don't necessarily watch the Panthers because we've been bad for so long and didn't understand the need at which this team really needed an offensive tackle. That was my number one need for this team. That
Mm-hmm.
was despite tight end, safety, linebacker depth issues, we needed tackles. And I think that we nailed the need there. But to get on to some of the biggest losers of the draft, there are three that stick out. Let's start with Arizona because we talked about them already. Taking Love at 3 was not my favorite pick. I know he's incredibly talented, and I hope it works out. But getting Jeremiah Love at pick 3 when they could have had other things, and then Carson Beck at 65. Look, I know he was the fourth quarterback taken, maybe. I am just
That's
not a fan.
still, yeah,
Uh,
that doesn't move me. That seems
yeah,
like it seems very much like, and I hate to say it because I think in 2010, like the Panthers threw like four different draft picks, or like at least had four different slots on their roster and practice squad for quarterbacks they picked up as rookies. But like Jimmy Clausen esque, or who
kind
was the
of,
kid out
yeah.
of and didn't we just re-sign him? A guy that we took in the third round under Marty Herney's tenure. Oh, he went to
Talking
West
about Matt
Virginia.
Moore.
No, no, no. West
No.
Virginia guy that we drafted in the third when we still had Cam Newton. I don't know why I'm blanking on his name. Like, I want to say
It,
his name. Like,
Brian St. Pierre was like the sixth round or
no,
something.
this was
Yeah.
he played locally, high school here. Tall dude. We drafted him. Um,
Yeah,
why am I
I
blanking out? I think he's on our practice squad right now. I'm gonna have to look
Will
this up.
Greer.
But
Is that?
Will Greer, there we
Oh,
go.
that
I don't
was
know why.
way later. I thought you were talking about
No,
2010.
no. I was saying in 2010 it was
Oh,
like
okay.
Jimmy Clausen, and then more recently Will Greer. But like this concept of like you're wasting a day two pick on a guy that's not going to be good. They
Right.
just isn't, and it's a wasted pick when it's like you could address so many other needs, potentially get a starter at a position where it's like this helps us now, and not a quarterback that maybe over the course of his career starts 20 games. Like I do not see it with Carson Beck, and a lot of other people feel the same way.
You said Miami was a Mendoza touchdown runaway. If Beck, and it's hilarious because Beck, former Georgia player, it was not the exact same play, but it was the exact same concept that Tua Tagovailoa beat Georgia in the national championship. The cover two hole shot was sitting there, and where Tua threads it perfectly to Devontae Smith, Carson Beck throws up a duck and it gets picked off by the Indiana DB, and that's what loses him the game. So getting him there, their pick in the second round was Chase Basantis, a guard. Fine value there, but their first picks being running back, guard, backup quarterback, and then the rest of their picks being more premium positions. I don't like the order there necessarily, especially when could use another tackle, another receiver. We talked about edge. They didn't really add any edge rushers, so hopefully they get some hits from this class. But Arizona, not my favorite whatsoever.
Yeah, left a lot of meat on the bone. And when you come into a draft where you have a bunch of picks, you have a new coaching staff, you're expecting some.
Yeah, and that's the point too. Jeremiah Love was Mike LaFleur's first pick as a head coach. And
I,
what kind of team are they trying? Are they going to be a run first team? The LaFleur lineage comes from McVay and Shanahan, who are run guys, but they also have dynamic passing games as well. So
and I'm guessing maybe they came in and they were like, hey, we're happy with the trio of Marvin Harrison Jr., Michael Wilson, and Trey McBride, and we need like a running back. But again, we talked about guys that were on the depth chart where it's like, if you're looking at this from like a 5 year, 6 year window, maybe it makes sense. But for the next year or two, this seems like a waste of a pick, and it remains to be seen if they end up making anything of this. So I think the other two kind of get lumped into the same bucket.
yeah,
Two teams that really just kept reaching, and the one had a first round pick, the other team did not. But it just actually no. Did the 49ers
no,
trade out of the
they
first?
they traded out of the
That's
first. So
right. They
they
traded out of the
had their
first.
pick traded down a couple of times to take the receiver we talked about earlier, Dejon Stribling, who's like 90th on consensus. He went pick 33, and then I'm just going to read off the names that they had here. All of them were considered reaches except for one. Stribling at pick 33, Romello Height, who we had talked about, who played opposite David Bailey. I said would go around pick 100, or that's where he was to me. He went 70th. Kalen Black, who was RB2 for a lot of the year at Indiana, went pick 90. He wasn't invited to the combine.
And he's not a
Grayson
pass
Halton,
catcher. He's not like
no,
a
he's
guy that's
not.
going to replace Christian McCaffrey. Like
And
it's just a waste
and
of
the
a pick.
Niners do this every year with
Mm-hmm.
they take a third round running back who doesn't play. Grayson Halton, Oklahoma defensive tackle. I'm fine with that at pick 107. I thought that was good value. Carver Willis from Washington, he played tackle, should play guard in the league, but doesn't have a ton of experience moving in, and they really need offensive line help. Ephesians Prysock, a corner from Washington. Jaden Duggar, linebacker from Louisiana, not LSU, just Louisiana. And then Enrique Cruz, a tackle from Kansas, who I didn't know much about. All these guys, except for Halton, the defensive tackle, were considered significant reaches compared to the consensus board. And they were kind of made fun. The 49ers and the other teams, the Jaguars, they were all made fun of throughout the weekend because of this.
It's just it's and like Grant Cohen, who's a phenomenal reporter for the 49ers, like he keeps the head coach and the general manager there like accountable with asking the tough questions. Like he is not afraid to kind of kiss butt or do any like a lot of reporters you do see kind of like kiss tail and they make it seem like everything's great and it's not. And it's like Grant Cohen just like cuts right to it. And he was like, hey, like, why do you guys continually like, and this has been like there is historical evidence and precedence of this in San Francisco. Since John Lynch has gotten there in 2017, they are the team that reaches the most in drafts. It's like, why do you do this over and over and over again and not learn from like your mistakes? And it's just like you hear the same cop outs you hear with coaches with like fourth down decision making, where it's like, hey, like we have our own board, we have our own way of evaluating talent, and it's just it's wrong. And it's like
It,
you would
it
think
hasn't really worked, has it?
and that's where it's just like I would get it if like for some reason they're finding the gems, like they're finding the Puka Nakuas. They're and like obviously they found Brock Purdy as Mr. Irrelevant and they got lucky from that standpoint. And maybe some of that goes on Kyle
But
Shanahan for
do you know who else
development.
was in that draft?
A
Trey
lot of people,
Lance,
yeah,
who they
no, and
took with the third pick and traded 3 firsts for, or 2 firsts. But like, this is the point you're making. Over the last 3 or 4 draft classes, Brock Purdy's their only contributor. And when that's the case, yes, Shanahan's good enough to make make magic out of it, but at some point you got to get him some players. And so I think this falls back on John Lynch.
I think it ultimately does, and so it's one of those, like, obviously there is cohesiveness there from like the scouting department and coach, because John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan both came to San Francisco in 2017. Like, there's some sort of agreement between the two on like their process and how they're picking guys, but again, it doesn't make sense. And then you look at Jacksonville and you have Liam Cohen and Gladstone there. It's just, again, I think they think they're smarter than the rest of the league. And the Jaguars are one of those teams where it's like they don't show up to a lot of events. They don't go to the combine. Like, they're one of those teams that they do their own evaluations and they tune out all the noise. And like, that's fine and dandy. But the whole point, and like, this has been a debate like post draft, it's like the usage of consensus boards. And it's, no one is here saying that they are gospel. But we talked about it earlier in the episode. Like, it has been proven, like the data backs it up, that hey, reaches are reaches and steals aren't really steals. Like, if you have a guy dropped on your board because of medicals or character concerns that the media is not aware of, like, that's fine. But the reach on players over and over and over again does not help you long term. Your chances of hitting on your dart throws get lesser, or like the percentage grows less and less as it goes on. And it's just, I don't know, like the Jaguars, I get like you're going the 12 13 personnel, but taking Nate Borkercher out of Texas A&M, they did get Emmanuel.
Career high 19 receptions for 190 yards this year. They made sure to stress that on the broadcast.
There you go. They took his teammate Albert Regis, picked 81 in the third round. They did their one of their only non-reaches. This would be quote unquote a steal. Emmanuel Pregnon, who fell, I think, because of age concerns out of Oregon. Then you take Jalen Husky, a safety out of Maryland, Wesley Williams, an edge rusher out of Duke, another tight end, Toner Koziel, a tight end out of Houston. And so you look at these, and they had, over the course of the entire draft, they had, let me count this out. They had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 picks in the entire draft, a lot being on day 3. But out of those 10 picks, 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, and I think had Parker Hughes, the linebacker, their last pick, been on a big board consensus ranking, we would have seen how far a reach he was. But 4 out of those 10 picks, they had a value delta of 100. So that means based on consensus and based on where they took them, there was 100 pick difference. And that's just insane. Like that to me is mind blowing when you're looking at this team. And it's not just them. Like, the San Francisco 49ers did this too. That is why both of these teams are in our losers section.
I'll say this: the Jaguars and their staff have greater resources than you and I do, right? When it comes to evaluating, they don't have greater resources than me and you and 1,000 independent fan evaluators and every other team in the league. They don't have more resources than that combined. And that's how you get the consensus board. And that's why most teams fall in line with it. Some teams sometimes get steals like Carolina did this year. But when most of your picks are considered reaches, you are not the smartest guy in the room. And I think this goes back to last year. Oh, at Jacksonville's draft, they trade. I'm not even hating on the Travis Hunter thing. They tried and it failed. He got hurt. He needs to be more of a corner full time. Whatever. I don't really mind that deal. The rest of their draft did not contribute at all last year, other than Bashal Tutin, who was their he was the second running back after they traded Bigsby, and he was kind of a in and out guy. ETN got most of the work. So if they're going to follow the path of, and I know he's a McVay guy, but if they're going to be more like the 49ers, it's almost a curse that they have a coach like Liam Cohen who can make something out of nothing, kind of like Shanahan, because the front office is going to continue to evaluate and think that they're doing the right thing, when in reality, it's probably not going to work out, because these guys, they're reaches for a reason, and everybody's saying that they're reaches for a reason. Their first pick in the draft, we can call Travis Hunter their first pick because they traded their first for him. Their first pick in this year's draft, Nate Borkacher, who you talked about, had a career high 19 receptions this season. Like, even
Yeah, I get the reemphasis of that, because it's like the
so
whole
Kenyon
point of him
Sadiq,
is to be blocker, or like a
yeah,
blocking tight end.
we talked about Kenyon Sadiq being like the lowest producer ever. Sadiq's this year outproduces all of Borkacher's college career. Like, I don't know. Yeah, hopefully they're able to get some talent in there. Hopefully some of their guys this year can contribute, because last year didn't necessarily see it. Um, and it's interesting, no running backs either. I thought that running back would be something they addressed given that ETN went to the Saints, but they did not draft a single running back. Maybe somebody in rookie minicamp shows up on the roster, but right now, Chris Rodriguez, Facial Tootin, and LaQuint Allen are their guys. Two of whom were rookies last year and didn't contribute a ton.
What's funny with me is like Liam Cohen obviously had time with McVay's staff, so this isn't like a direct correlation with like Kyle Shanahan and what he's doing. But like a lot of the success that Liam Cohen saw in LA and then he saw at Tampa Bay when he was the offensive coordinator, it was like you had great offensive lines in front of your quarterback, your running game, like things that kind of
Mhm.
set the tone because that's what trench players do. And it's like you look at Jacksonville and the 49ers draft combined, they had 18 picks total. So the Jaguars had 10 picks, the 49ers had 8. The 49ers only used 2 of their picks on their offensive line, and there's a lot of holes. You wonder if Trent Williams beyond this year is going to be like something that you can trot out on the field and get the same result you have been, which is like close to all pro caliber play. And then the Jaguars, it's like they have concerns on their offensive line too. This was a kind of patchwork job they did to it. And it's like all they did was add Pregnon. And it's just like, what are we doing here when it's like this is so important to everything you want to do and scheme up? And it's like you're not prioritizing it. It's like you're not going to find these guys in free agency. So like if you can't draft, like is the next move like, hey, just trade picks for other proven stars and maybe that's the solution for these two franchises. But it's frustrating. It's frustrating because you clearly have very capable head coaches and a good coaching staff, but the front office does not seem to want to give them the talent to work with.
And I think there's some irony with Liam Cohen being coming from the Rams and the Buccaneers, and you talked about the team buildup and stuff, or team makeup and stuff like that. They also have two of the best GMs in the game, in Les Snead and Jason Light, making really good picks for those franchises. Even when Les Snead didn't have first rounders, he's finding third, fourth, fifth round starters. And
After this
Jason
year, I
Light,
don't know. There's a lot of questions about Les Need. He may need to go back to the F them picks mantra because this was a
well,
little brutal this year.
even let's just consider that they didn't make a first round pick then. I have faith that some of their later picks will contribute because Les Snead has proven that, right? I
That's
have
fair.
faith that
That's fair.
Jason Light, even if he takes measurable or guys that don't fit traditional measurables like Ruben Bain, he did it with Kalijah Cansey too. He did it with Via Vea too, and they worked out. And so I have faith in that working. I don't have faith in what John Lynch did this year or in what James Gladstone had done this year. So I think that's a good wrap up point for the biggest losers in the draft. We can go ahead and get to takes. My take, we talked about it earlier, is that I think we're going to see a lot of involvement with especially the top 3 rookies in this class. I think Freeling's going to start. I think, to be quite frank, I think Lee Hunter's going to start as well. I wouldn't, maybe not at nose tackle, but I think he's going to start along the front and play greater than half of the snaps there. I think Chris Brazel, the second, the receiver Carolina drafted from Tennessee, will end up with more snaps than Lee get this season. And I think he will be the starter. I said before week 9 because I wanted to say halfway through the season, but week 9 is like a quantifiable point. I think
Do you
we're
want
going
to
to
say
see
bye
him.
week? Do you and I don't know what
Well,
like we've usually had a later bye week, so
yes,
that would
that's why I
probably kind
said
of conflict with
halfway.
that. Yeah.
So I said before week 9 because there's 18 weeks. So, or maybe I'll say before week 10. So that it'll be exactly halfway. Could happen earlier. I know that when Canales got here, he took his time uh, before Liget surpassed Mingo in the starting lineup. But that Panthers roster was also horrific, and so I think there was an eval period needed. I think Liget has a role this year. I think he should play more as that 11 personnel blocking receiver, like we were talking about. He can line up in line with his frame and kind of get out into the middle with some choice routes. I think that would work out great for him. But I think the outside receivers are going to end up being McMillan and Brazel with Coker in the slot as their primary functions. They'll be moved around and stuff, but I think Brazel's going to end up starting halfway through the season.
I like that take. I wasn't high on Leggett, and obviously the past couple of years he's hurt his own stock. Even though he's a great guy, and don't want to take anything away from Leggett as a person, but as a wide receiver, he has just not lived up to the draft hype and the draft billing he had. I think when you look at a player of his caliber, and obviously Chris Bell, player out of Louisville this past year that got drafted by Miami, he gives off very much those vibes where it's like boomer bust prospect, and it's just when you're when your ceiling and floor is has so much variance, it's just better to stay, in my opinion, clear of those players unless you're taking those guys like late day 2, day 3, because those are flyers. They are in essence like you are trying to gauge how you feel about this player. And so where Chris Bell went this past draft, I think is a reflection of where Leggett should have gone. I think Brazo also has that high floor, high ceiling variance, but I think being around T Mac and Coker, he's not going to be asked to do a whole bunch of stuff. He's going to be asked to do what he did really well at Tennessee, and that's run these clear out routes, keep defenses honest so that like T Mac and Coker have one on one coverage underneath. And I think that is going to open up the passing game and allow Bryce Young to be, I think, more versatile in his approach, and you might see a few more deep ball pass attempts because of just all the skill sets that are on the field. So I think my take is going to be, this is like I'm trying to figure out if I want to go like more national or I think the take I'm going to have is going to be Panthers related. I think this out of this past draft class, the player that is going to have the most impact as a rookie will actually be Sam. Is it Hecht or Height? Or is
It's
it
hecked.
Hecht?
It's hecked.
It is
Yeah.
Hecht. So I was right the first. I thought it was Hecht, but it's like it's always weird with those CHT endings and like how it comes from the European dialect. But I think Sam Hecht, he will be where you're saying Chris Brazo will be a starter this year. I think he'll at least start 4 games this year. I don't think Luke Fortner is going to be a guy that stays healthy the whole time, and I think he'll be early contributor, and we'll be able to see like first glance like, okay, is this a good Cade Mays replacement? Is he able to kind of step up to the plate and deliver? I think we'll be able to have a few games this year where we're able to kind of quickly kind of like figure out if he's the guy or not.
I like it. Uh, I think a lot of these players are going to end up starting in this Panthers
At
class.
some point, yeah, it was
Yeah,
just it was finding that game threshold because it's like I think Luke Fortner is the starter day one, but
right.
again, like he could get hurt. We've had injuries at the offensive line. The turf field at Bank of America doesn't help, so I definitely think he'll see the field at some point, maybe even as a guard. I think he's big enough that if you wanted to slot him in as like a replacement, if Zavala's already in for one of the guys, that he could fill in for a game, but we'll see.
It's good to have guard center versatility, right? Especially if you're not starting. And I think Hecht can bring that. And like I said, I think most of the guys I would imagine start a couple games this season. Hopefully, we get good production from them. Think that's going to do it. We'll be back probably next week to break down the roster as it stands now before we get into kind of the off-season mode and the schedule. Will be dropping in a couple weeks, so we can talk about that as well. But until then, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your content. And until we're back next time, keep pounding.